H Calorie comes out with their new Toolbox Heater 2. This version has significant improvements over the original one. We'll also take a look at this Toolbox Heater as well, just to compare the two to give you some ideas of the improvements, and we'll look at some test footage, also some use case scenarios, and show you a few things about these two. That way, if you're looking for one of them, hopefully this information will help you out. As soon as you get this out of the box, this is what you'll see is the main diesel heater unit along with the AC to DC converter and your DC power cord with ring terminals. I did buy a 12-volt socket, so I could use this instead, which is more efficient. You will have your main blower hose along with a vent that does swivel. This is so you can permanently mount this somewhere, along with your intake tube and filter, along with the exhaust hose and the muffler with some clamps as well, and also some bracket mounts, a remote, and your manual. On the front of the diesel heater, you'll have your intake port and also your AC or DC connection point. This will then power up the unit, which you can then go through to display, but this will have to be powered on in order for you to make some adjustments. On the side of the unit, you'll have two tabs up top, which this will open the side. This then gives you access to the new 1.6 gallon fuel tank, which is larger than the previous version. If you need more access or more room to service this, it does have two pins, which you can pull both of these out and then remove the door entirely, which this gives you more access for room to work on it if you need to. And this is built actually really well, as it does have insulation around the exhaust pipe. It does have this rubber isolator right on the fuel pump, which the ticking on this model is substantially less than the other one. On the backside is where you'll find your heat outlet and also the exhaust. Okay, before we get to some of the testing, we're going to go over some of the things I don't like right away. Now, one thing that is cool though is that they do provide the AC to DC converter in both of these models. So this is a nice thing to have. That way you have the option of either doing a full DC hookup or the converter, but these do take a little bit more power. So if this is only using maybe 20 watts, this will use 25 to 30 if you were to compare it on an equal power station, plus the AC to DC conversion loss that you will have with a power station. So then you kind of get a little bit double, which is nice to be able to just use one of these 12-volt sockets and go directly in, as long as your power station or the diesel heater you buy can actually run off of one of these. Not all diesel heaters can. Some of them use too much watts, and if they're too inefficient, then you can't use these. And by the way, both of these do come with a remote, just so you know, so you can control these, and these do work pretty good. The app function on this one works a lot better. The app on this one is okay, it does the job, but the app controls on this one is so much better, and it worked perfectly inside my RV and from several feet away. Okay, now one of the things I don't like about this unit already is that this hose is 3.5 inch. This hose is 3 inch, and then this hose is also 3 inch as far as the diameter, the ID. Now, not a lot of people use 3.5. It's either 3 or it's 4. I'm not really sure why they went with the 3.5. It does help move more air, but the problem is that trying to find longer hoses. There are some out there, they're just not readily available like these, or like these kind of more drier hoses that you normally see. Now they do make these reducers, which I just picked one of these up. It was $11. It's super cheap. So then you can just put in a reducer, hook up a 3-inch hose like this one, and you can reduce down, which actually this does speed up the airflow a little bit, and you'll see that in some test footage here in just a minute. So it would have been nice if they did go with maybe more of a standard hose, but picking up a reducer honestly isn't that big of a deal, and then it lets you use things like this, and you just put on your hose clamp, and you're good to go. Now one more small little gripe that I don't like is your intake tube. Flip around back to this side again, is that when this is introduced into your intake side onto the nipple here, the intake tube is actually just a little bit larger, so this is actually quite a bit smaller. And so if you look, it doesn't really snug on here very good. Now you can use a hose clamp and it does work. I found that in my testing I don't even need it. I'm not going to use this thing. All this is just basically a hollow barrel. And this fits just fine and would actually go into a bracket that would go here and here and just kind of sit there like that. For me, I'm not going to use it, at least in my use case scenario. Now I did speak to my contact. He actually said that they are looking at already revising this. The rest of the unit so far is pretty nice. And one of the only other advantages of this one actually is that this one you can see the fuel tank level right on the front of it. Kind of makes it nice, that way you have at least a kind of a guesstimate of how long it's going to last, versus this one you will have to do a visual inspection, as there is no way to determine how much fuel is left. Now one of the benefits of this tank though is that they did put the drain right on the bottom, so you pretty much get the most amount of runtime. They did at the top of your fuel cap add a fuel strainer. Now, even though this fuel strainer can block some debris, it's still going to let some of the finer particles pass by, which for me, I will probably add a pancake filter, much like I did with this one when I first got it. The pancake filters are super cheap and they're really easy to install. But overall, when it comes to using this one, even the screen on this one is a lot better. And again, I didn't use the screen that much because the app was so good, I pretty much just used that one. And when you turn these on, you don't typically mess with them too much. And this one also has the ability to go up into high altitudes. There is a setting for it from 3,000 to 5,000 meters, which is extremely high. That's over 10,000 feet, by the way, which for me personally, I won't ever really be going up that high. Most of the altitudes I go to are around 8,000 and below. But now let's go ahead and take these outside so I can show you the differences between these two, and then we'll come back. Okay, so we're going to be doing this DC connection first to see if it can be powered up off of a smaller power station like this and a 12-volt socket. Not all of them can. They will overload this port because this can only put out about 126 watts consistent. So as we activate this, and again, this app is pretty nice, much better than the last one. So we'll let this fire up, and I'll try to keep some of this footage here, but I will skip around a little bit because this will take a couple minutes. But you can see there, the screen looks pretty nice. Come down here, we're going to see how high this goes. What we don't want is to be in the 140s and 150s, so it trips that. So we'll see how much this really draws. Okay, as we take a look here, this was, yeah, look at that, 128. So what we don't want to do is bump into the 130s and 140s consistently. So we'll see what this looks like as it gets going. Kind of hear it starting to tick now. So again, there we go, 123. So still doing good. If it stays here, then this should have no problem firing up off of a smaller power station, which would be ideal. You don't need the AC to DC converter, and right there, we're right on the edge, still doing good. But if it's only bumping into the 130s once in a while, that's fine. We just don't want it to stay at 135 or 140 because eventually it will trip that 12-volt socket. So 131, so far so good. It may just do it. Well, there's 138, that's the highest so far. Well, as it still tries to fire up, we'll look at the app. You can see Gear 1 altitude says 480 feet. I'm more around 550, 575, but oh, look, there's a 140, still going. Now, see, if it's only there for a second, it's fine. It won't trip it. As long as we stay in these 120s, oh, look at that, there it goes. And so, yeah, it's running. It's going to fire up and start all the way. So this is great. This is more efficient than definitely some of the cheaper ones that I've had, where they would not fire up. And look, no smoke. This didn't smoke at all, unlike some of the other ones. Nice and hot out of there. That's hot there. So yeah, it's going and it's going to run. So we'll let that get spooled up, and then we'll come back and check our power draws and see what that looks like. Okay, so this is almost spooled up all the way. Come back here. Yep, hot air coming out of there. And this is pretty noisy, so let's get a muffler on there and quiet that down. All right, so this is one that I had from the other one that we'll see here in a minute. Put this on. Ah, so much better. And before this gets real hot, we'll just kind of move this out of the way. Okay, now overall, this is definitely quieter than the other one as far as the ticking goes and even the exhaust, although the fan noise seems to be slightly higher because this side sounds a little bit more like a jet. Let's see over here. Look at that, only 27, 28 at the moment as far as how many watts. But yeah, you can hear that thing definitely sucking in some air. Take a look at our app again, or sorry, the screen. Air heater, 0.5 feet, so that's, 500 feet, so that seems halfway accurate. Okay, now that this is finally spooled all the way down, listen how quiet that is. And come down here, and look at how many watts. About 8 watts, minimal power draw, going up to 20, so probably using 12 to 15, maybe 10 watts. Kick this up, let's go all the way to full speed. Okay, so this has been running here at 10 for a good couple minutes, and look at that, 35 watts roughly, so minimal amount of power draw. Every once in a while you'll see a little peak. About 4 hours of runtime on this little power station, but I can't hear much ticking. It's pretty minimal, and I'm right next to it. Can you hear it? Man, that is just barely any. But this part, that's pretty loud. But of course we are right next to it. So we'll do some more tests and we'll kind of see what this is compared to that one, because that one you can definitely hear the ticking as far as a fuel pump. Okay, so what we're going to do is check for dangerous carbon monoxide, because that's the stuff that can kill you. So this little pin detects anything like propane, gasoline, diesel, swamp gas, and more. So you just put this in the path of anything that happens to be blowing or around maybe a propane regulator, and it should detect any types of leaks. And so because this is a combustion engine, we want to make sure it's sealed properly and none of that combustion is making it outside into the blower area where all the hot air comes out. Now all this does is makes a little beep, and if we put it here, and there you go. So that's the carbon monoxide you do not want to be breathing in if it's in your tent or in your RV. And these little pins are cheap, so I check this one, I check them all just because, and you should even do it maybe after several hundred hours, check it again, because that means if you are getting some, then it's time to service this thing for sure. But this one is great. Some of the cheap ones do leak though. Okay, so this is a sound check from about 7 feet away. You can hear any ticking. And this is also max level. So there we go, max. We're gonna drop this down. Let's go to almost 50%. We'll go to 6, see what it looks like. And that definitely makes it a little quieter. No fuel pump tick. I can't hear one. Can you? And to give you an idea what it looks like as far as power usage, about 25 to 30 watts maybe at 50 or 60%. Okay, so here's the older model from H-Calorie, and again, this is about 7 feet, at least where I'm holding the meter. And this one is almost at max. I couldn't actually get it to go all the way to max on the app for some reason, but we'll just use it right here just to kind of see. And if you listen, you can kind of hear the ticking. Overall noise levels are about the same, but you can definitely hear the ticking. It actually sounded a little bit more like an engine knock. Okay, on this test, we're going to see how much air moves out of these hoses. We'll put the bigger one on, obviously, the newer model, and the smaller one will go on the older model, and we'll kind of see how much air is moving between the two. We'll use a meter to kind of check. It's basically an aeronometer, so we'll hook up the 3-inch hose to the old one, and we'll hook up the 3.5-inch hose to the new one. Okay, both diesel heaters are going to be at level 10. They're both going to be set up the same on these blocks, and we're going to use this little meter right here. This is going to be set up about 6 inches away from the hose. And as you can see, this is blowing 165 degrees at 19.3 feet a second. The other one is now fully on max speed, again with this 6 inches away on a 3-inch tube at 24.8 or 0.5 at 157 degrees and 24.5 feet per second. So now since that's a 3-inch tube, we're going to go ahead and add this reducer to a 3-inch. I'll put it on the 3.5, and then we'll see what this changes as far as our output. And so now you can see 175 degrees and also 24.1 feet per second. This is the older model again, just to double check as our temperature did go up a little bit, but air velocity about the same. Now this is the older model as we look at the power draw using the AC to DC converter, around 45 to maybe 50 watts if we were to average it out. Now as we take a look at the other model, this is using just straight DC without the AC to DC converter. Now both of these models are both at max, and you can see that using the DC is more efficient by about 10 watts. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I have this in my RV at the moment. Now, I've been using a scenario like this before, but just so you can see what the temperatures look like as far as the exhaust pipe. 236 degrees on the pipe, that's the muffler, which the outer part is not nearly as hot as the entry and exit points. And then, of course, that's the exhaust blowing on the ground, which is straight down from the RV, which I did add an extension, which I will show you in a minute. Now, as far as this going through the through port, as you take a look here on the inside, this is the main heater hose, and then the inside temperatures as it goes into that little reducer and into the RV. and then the exhaust pipe as it goes through this through port. Now that's 237, and that's roughly the hottest point of this whole section. Alright, well, I had to take a quick break as it was starting a pretty good downpour, but that's the extension that I added because I didn't want the exhaust to build up underneath the RV. This is something I can add to kind of help it kick out to the side. Now this has been running for several hours in here, and I'm wanting to monitor this and check on any hot spots is what I'm looking for. Now it's hard to see, and I'll show you this in a minute, but this is just a welding mat that I'm using. This is good for up to 1800 degrees and usually a direct flame. Now this is mainly just protecting the plastic, but this is not hot at all. As you can see, I can put my hand right here next to it. It's not burning, it's warm, sure, it actually is like a hand warmer, and all I did was make a slit in this, so it's kind of protecting the plastic port as it goes through it, just in case it bounces around a little bit like that. And even the lid, it's slightly warm, but it's not hot. And again, anything that you see here, you'll want to do this on your own at your own risk, but I'm constantly monitoring this about every 20 minutes to make sure this setup is going to work for me. Now that's the newer EcoFlow Delta 3 Plus. That's a great little unit. You can see what it's using right now, about 30 watts. That's over 1,000 watt hours for that power station. It has dual solar inputs. Great new unit that just came out. And so that's something I would recommend, is just a slightly bigger power station. But let me show you what this looks like underneath here. So now as you look up, that's a through port that I made with a plastic extension, and then I put some ducting material around it, the aluminum tape, which I've already used that for several hours already with the other diesel heater. But as we take a look at fuel, okay, so I filled this up to about 60%, and it's been running about 4 hours since I started, so we'll just kind of take a peek. And I've been running between 9 and 8 as far as the settings. So now as we look, so what is that, maybe 40%, 35% from where it was about there, around 60 maybe. So far that's not too bad. I'll have to do another video later as I get some more runtime with this, as I usually like to try to do updates on products I use about 2 or 3 months later. And since we are going into winter and I have a couple trips that will be coming up, I'll get some use time with this. But one of the benefits of having it in here is it helps heat up this section where also my water lines are back over there, so they won't freeze. Now I still may have to use the furnace if it gets really cold, but I also put a thermometer in here so we can look at the data from over the last 4.5 hours. So here's, you take a look at about 12:45, I ended up resetting this. So you can see that the relative humidity inside that particular cabin starts to go down, and also the temperature now starts to go up. So you can see as we started in the low or upper 50s and then into the 60s, this particular compartment ended up reaching a peak of 70 degrees. And you can see the dips, that's where I would open the door. But as we head inside the RV, this is where I have the air coming out. This is underneath the steps, and I took that vent plate off and flipped it around upside down so the air blows up. I sealed both of those off underneath the stairs as they were blowing lots of cold air in from that storage compartment. And this is not a return area for your RV. There's so many leaks that your air or your furnace is going to get plenty of air. Now this is where I ended up putting a temp tracker, is right in the center of my bed, just sitting on top of this fan. This is so I can monitor what the temperature was doing inside this room, and sometimes in the winter I will leave that slide in to help maintain more control of the air temperature. Now you can see again where that dip is on the temperature up top. That is where it started, and I ended up letting this run for several hours, and you can see it ended up getting very warm in here, and also the humidity levels also dipped a lot. So it just gives us a little information to go off of. Okay, so when it comes to these two diesel heaters, at the time of this video, these are almost exactly the same price. This one is way more efficient, it uses less energy, it uses less fuel, it is also a lot quieter, and the construction is way better. So overall, this is technically a way better buy. Not to mention the app function is better, the screen is way better, so there's really only those couple things I didn't like, which is the 3.5-inch hose, but you can get around that really easy, and also a little intake port down below. It's not that big of a deal, just a couple of the things that I found that I didn't like. I again would add an additional fuel filter just in case for the smaller debris that could get through, but overall this is a much better buy. Now both of these did fire up off of the Little River 3, but this is one that I would prefer, as this only has 245 watt hours. This has just over 1,000 watt hours, and it has dual solar inputs and can do just so much more than these little ones. And I don't know anybody that has bought a power station and wished they had bought something smaller, as they almost always look for something bigger. So I hope the information in this video helped you out, and I hope to see you guys in another video.